Hello and welcome to another video on the best games of a letter arcade edition, and this is for the letter H. So this is where I imagine, what if I could only choose 5 games per letter per system and discard all others? What would I choose? So this means I'm coming at it from the point of view not what are the games most important to gaming history, or even which games are loved by most, but instead, for me, what games do I personally enjoy to play today above all else? Now my choices here may surprise you, but really this is a video series, is a bit of fun, and it's really there to rekindle some old memories and help give some people some suggestions on what games to play the next time they're looking through their fully loaded retro gaming lists to decide what to play. Okay, as I mentioned, this is for the arcades and the letter H. So without further ado, let us begin. Now for my 5th choice, I had a really tough time as there was a few I was deciding to include on this spot, but in the end I decided to go for the brilliant if tough blaster Hyperdual, released in 1993 by Technosoft. Yes, the same company who did the brilliant Thunder Force series. In fact, this is essentially the same team who made Thunder Force 4, so if you love that game then you'll know what to expect here. Being made for the arcades as opposed to the Mega Drive, it means the technical wizards have really pulled out all the stops here, with epic full screen effects and full on action that still make your jaw drop even today. From that opening level with a full-on space battle raging behind you in beautiful parallax, all set to the amazing soundtrack, you know you're in for something special, and it doesn't disappoint. One of the gimmicks of the game here is there's 2 modes to the ship that can be triggered depending on whether you press the first fire button or the second, which switches you between a spaceship or a robot. Press the first fire button and you keep in ship form. This has marginally less firepower than the robot mode, but is a smaller hit target and you're a little quicker. Likewise, the robot is slower but more powerful and with a bigger hit target. Now consequently I prefer to be the ship most of the time, but it's a really cool feature nevertheless. Incidentally, if you press both fire buttons together, you also get another special attack where orbs rotate around you for some additional firepower. Now the power-ups in this game are amazing here, with a huge arsenal of weaponry at your disposal, including a brilliant full-on computer controlled drone robot. This is like having a player 2 help you out in the action as he joins you in the fight. Yes, overall I really enjoy this game, although I do find it still far too tough, particularly as you go onto the claustrophobic levels, and it makes it a little bit too frustrating for me if I'm honest. But if you're up for that mega challenge and love the Thunder Force games, then this is well worth tracking down. Now back in the day this only saw a single home port on the Sega Saturn, released in 1996, but wow, what a home port this is, with both an arcade perfect conversion and an enhanced Sega Saturn version of the game, with even better graphics and some minor gameplay tweaks. Sadly, this Sega Saturn game is one of the priciest games for the platform, so unless you have some really serious deep pockets, then the only way to play it is on Mednafen Sega Saturn emulator, or on MAME as you're seeing here. Okay, that brings me on to my 4th game, and for this I've chosen Hydro Thunder, released in 1999 by Midway Games. This is a fun arcade powerboat racer, which is all about riding the waves across 12 exciting tracks, all against the other powerboats. This is pure arcade racing action, having you negotiate the course and jumps to pick a short nitro boost to speed you more quickly along the checkpoint based tracks. It's also fun here, with great shortcuts, death-defying heart in your mouth drops that mean you will never tire of the stunningly fun arcade racer. It also has a nice range of crafts as well that can be raced on, which is a nice touch. Thankfully, this game did see a brilliant home port on Sega Dreamcast console, and it had some okay ports on the PlayStation and N64 as well. Even better, a few years later, it also appeared on the brilliant Midway Arcade Treasures Volume 3 compilation. This was released on the PS2, Xbox and GameCube. Now incidentally, if you're an arcade racing lover like me, this compilation is well worth tracking down, as it contains lots of arcade races that's never really been effectively emulated elsewhere, so well worth giving this compilation a go. Incidentally, if you're a fan of the Hydro Thunder game, then know that there's a sequel called Hydro Thunder Hurricane, which came out on the Xbox 360 and is still compatible on later Xbox machines and PC. In fact, it's on Game Pass. This is a great update and a worthy sequel, in my opinion. Right, let's go on to my number 3 choice. And for this, I went for the Sega racing classic Hang On, released way back in 1985. This was Yu Suzuki's and his team's first foray into the racing genre, giving their answer to Namco's pole position, but with bikes. Gameplay is simple here. Race against the other riders and against the clock and try to reach that next checkpoint before the timer runs out. Each checkpoint stage is wonderfully different as well, really driving you on to reach that next location. You start off in the Alps, and then it's the Grand Canyon, City Night, Seaside, and then finally the circuit to complete the game. Now, back in the day, this saw a really good Master System port, being a real system seller, being bundled in actually with most of the consoles. But outside of that, it really only saw conversions on some obscure Japanese machines like the MSX, so for many of the original game, it passed them by. Thankfully, years later, this did appear on the little-known Dreamcast Yu Suzuki Games Work Volume 1, which features many of his early titles, including this. Even better, on that same system of the Dreamcast, it appeared as a hidden game on Shenmue 1 and 2, which is a lovely touch as you go to visit the arcade there. But outside of that, sadly, the only other way to play this is on MAME. Okay, now we come to my second choice, and it may surprise you here, but I have gone for the recent 2009 Raw Thrills arcade game called H2 Overdrive. Now, this was developed by Specular Interactive Incorporated and made by the same team who did the original Hydro Thunder game. It's also incidentally the people behind Dirty Driving and the Cruising USA games. So this is a sequel in all but name to that Hydro Thunder Midway classic, because sadly they couldn't get the agreement to license the name. But names aside, this is more of the same to that original, but with updated graphics and giving 7 full-on imaginative tracks that have you travel from London to Hong Kong to become the best powerboat racer. Alongside the speed boost pickups of the original, there's additional power-ups here, such as the nuclear pickup that will aid in destroying all around you for a limited time. And that's what I love with this game, is so many little touches, such as rewarding you 1 second boost for each rival boat you smash out the way, adding to the fun and mayhem. In addition, you're rewarded with points at the end of each race to help upgrade your boat and encourage you to play the game again. And that's what this game is. It's fun with a capital F-U-N. Now, I've always loved the premise of the original, and I even loved the Xbox-only sequel, Hydro Thunder Hurricane, but this game improves on that even more. So much so, I'm grinning in pure joy as I make my way through this game. Sadly, outside of the arcade original, this H2 Overdrive has never seen a home port, which is a real shame, and another reason that there needs to be a Raw Thrills racing compilation in everybody's life. But until that day, this can be played on Techno Parrot emulator, and it does a really good job, although be warned, you need a powerful gaming PC to pull it off. Outside of that, unfortunately, you'll just have to go rooting around the many seaside resorts to try and track down this gorgeous 42-inch screen sit-down cabinet. Either way, give this game a go, any way you can. We all need more arcade racers back in our lives again, and this goes some way towards that. Right, so that leaves my number 1 game for the letter H, and of course it had to be House of the Dead 2, released in 1998. by Sega and the development house Sega AM1 Research and Development Division. Now, in the original 1996 light gun game, it was a revelation on its release, putting the B-movie horror film shtick and building a fun roller coaster of a ride as you travelled and blasted your way around the monsters and zombies and beasties all around the Curian mansion. The sequel takes on that premise still further, being armed with a much more powerful Naomi board this time, and therefore it improves upon the original in every way. Now all the original cheesy dialogue is thankfully still there, but this time there's much more variety to all the levels, now being set in a sumptuous Italian city, and the improved visuals really bring out that great art design of all those zombies and monsters that was lost on the original more simplistic 3D engine game. The game also has some pretty epic boss battles as well, each with their own weaknesses that must be exploited. These ender level bosses are huge, really giving an epic feel to the game. It also has multiple paths being shown for different ways through, depending on whether you manage to save someone quickly before they're mauled to death by the marauding zombies. Now, hearing someone whom you fail to be quick enough say as their dying breath, "I don't want to die," before expiring in front of your eyes really retches at your guilt string here, and the developers and designers play on it so expertly. Consequently, since its release, this has become my favourite light gun game of all time, despite many other games being released over the years since. In fact, even 3 more official sequels and countless spin-offs of the original House of the Dead series. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the others. House of the Dead 3 with the darker visuals and the slower pace with the shotgun is a lot of fun, as is the all-out action Uzi machine gun filled 4th game, or even the 5th game Scarlet Dawn, which allows you to select different weaponry before each level, giving you the best of both worlds. But all of them, as good as they are, they seem to be missing some of that original magic of this second game. Now, back in the day, there was only a port of this on the Dreamcast console and the PC, but the Dreamcast console was epic as there was a light gun peripheral that you could get for the machine, and it was pretty much arcade perfect in your home. The PC version is also very solid, but of course you had to use the mouse and therefore lose something. Now, since then, the game has shown up as hidden unlockables on House of the Dead 3 sequel on the Xbox, which was a wonderful surprise back then, and later on it appeared on the Nintendo Wii with House of the Dead 2 and 3 Returns, finally allowing people to play this game with a light gun on modern TVs again. You see, that's the trouble with light gun games. Unless you're lucky enough to have an old CRT in your home, then light guns don't work. Therefore, it's really difficult to play these games as they're intended without either paying for a PC Wiimote variant like the Aim Track gun, or indeed the Wiimote Dolphin Bar emulator to allow Wiimotes to work with the PC. Therefore, these days, for ease, quite frankly, I usually go for the Wii version, or sometimes I do play it on my CRT on the Dreamcast or the original Xbox. The other ways of playing this is of course on the Dreamcast emulator such as Redream or Null DC, but to be honest, it's a right faff to get the mouse working properly on those emulators, and therefore I usually don't bother. Still, thankfully, yes, you guessed it, Arcade Club in Bury in the UK has a fully working arcade original cab, so you can play it on free play there, and it's so much fun. Well, there you go. There's my top personal favourite 5 games for the letter H on the arcade. But as always, I want to shout out some big hitters that failed to make my list, and plenty of honourable mentions that I'm really excited to tell you about because there's some real hidden gems on this letter. Okay, the first up is Hard Driving, released in 1989 by Atari. Now, this was the first game in the arcades to use 3D polygons for a racing game. Now, back in the day, it was a huge amount of fun, with you convincing yourself as a kid that it was like driving a real car. Now, there were only 2 tracks you could choose as you drove. There was the boring speedway track that quite frankly nobody would waste their hard-earned coin on as a kid. And if you turned right, the stunt track with a loop-the-loop and jumps to contend with. Now going back to it today, the game's really clunky, but undeniably it's important to video gaming history, and it certainly was one that I loved back in the day. Okay, next we have House of the Dead, the 1996 original. This is a great game and one that sadly never seems to make it on any of the House of the Dead compilations for some reason. It's a particular shame as only the Sega Saturn released the game with a substandard unfinished port of it, and then there was the PC which was marginally better, but thankfully years later the brilliant Sega Model 2 emulator recreates it perfectly, and this is a version I'm showing you here. So finally people can get to play this game again. Now another interesting game is Hydra by Atari. This is essentially road blasters in a boat, and it saw quite a few home ports back in the day and certainly had its moment, but going back to it today and playing it, it's a fun racer but not one that holds my attention if I'm honest. Another game is Hunchback, released in 1983. This was a hugely popular game on the 8-bit home computers, being a massive hit for Ocean. Now, based on the Century Electronics arcade original, this is a simple platformer as you take Quasimodo across a variety of castle ramparts to rescue his Esmeralda. It's slow and it's clunky and it was horribly out of date visually even on its release. And yet every time I go to it, my nostalgia tinted goggles always makes me play it whenever I get a chance. Finally, for the big hitters, there's Hyper Street Fighter 2 Anniversary Edition, released by Capcom in 2004. Now this was to celebrate Street Fighter being 15 years old, and this has all the fighters and moves from that 2D main series. So you have World Warrior, Hyper Fighting, Championship Edition, Super, Turbo and Super Turbo all in one game. This is a huge amount of fun and one definitely for all Street Fighter 2 lovers out there. Right, those are the big hitters, but I'm really keen to give you some honourable mentions as there's some amazing hidden gems that you may not have heard of before, and I can't wait to share them with you. First off, I have an absolute belter with Data East's 1993 title Heavy Smash The Future's Sports, made by the same designer who did Captain America and the Avengers in the arcade. This is a fun arcade sports game, mixing ideas from Rollerball and Speedball with great visuals and humour. This, for the longest time, was on my top 5 list for this letter, only getting squeezed out at the last minute. It all plays so well here, with each country having its own unique players and stadium, along with great backing tracks themed around each location you're visiting. So give this amazing game a go, especially in 2-player. You will not be disappointed. Now another game worthy of mention is Taito's 1989 shooter Hellfire. Now actually this was developed by Topelan, and to be honest isn't one of their best shooters in my opinion, but it is quite fondly loved by shooters out there, so I think it's worthy of a mention. Still, it's an okay, enjoyable blaster, and the soundtrack is undeniably epic. Now another oddball game is Hexium by Konami, released in 1992. This takes the idea of Tetris but uses hexagon shaped blocks instead of the usual squares. This really adds another dimension to the game, making you think things through that little bit more as you have to place the shapes. It's really well done as well, with great music and sound effects in the game. Now another hidden gem worthy of your time is Data East's Hoops, released in 1995. This is basically NBA Jam, but unlicensed, but it has great cartoon stereotype graphics around each of the countries, and it's a huge amount of fun here, being really playable and addictive with a great underlying soundtrack. In fact, for me, in many ways, I actually prefer this over NBA Jam, with the hand-drawn visuals being far more appealing to me personally than the digitized Midway title graphics. Talking of sports games, Taito's continuation of the arcade football series, such as Football Champ and Euro Champ 92, culminated to this final game in the series called Hattrick Hero95. This is a huge amount of fun. It may be missing some of the charm of the earlier titles, but but gameplay wise this is probably the best arcade football game out there. It also had a Sega Saturn port in Japan, which is well worth tracking down and getting if you enjoy those kind of games. Now here's an interesting one, Halley's Comet, released by Taito in 1986. Now, on its release, this was visually hopelessly out of date, but gameplay wise it's a really fun shooter, with the added element of shooting down the falling comets and ships, knowing that if you miss them they will go on to damage the Earth you are single-handedly protecting. Actually, you can see the Atari 7800 Planet Smashers game clearly took a lot of inspiration from this arcade game. It's probably why I like it so much. Now, keeping with lesser known titles, then we've got to mention Hammerin' Harry, which may be worth a look. This IRM 1990 title has you wield a large mallet, thwacking the enemies out the way and bashing boxes for bonuses to make your way to the end across 6 fun-filled stages. The music is quirky and it all plays delightfully unique and weird as you make your way through the game, and it's just a huge amount of fun. Now here's an interesting one, an unlicensed PacMan game made by Semicon. Now this has PacMan make his way through a 3D looking maze. Think Pac-Mania but zoomed out. There's a nice array of mazes and ideas for you to chew through here, with a great load of power-ups and interesting twists to the mechanics that does keep you genuinely interested. I certainly have a lot of fun with it. But I've saved the best for last though, because my final honourable mention is NMK's 1991 hidden gem called Hakka Mecca Fighter. And I've always had a soft spot for cute-em-ups, and they don't come much cuter than this, with you playing an otter who must put on his flying hat and goggles to take on the countless equally cute array of animals. I love this game. It looks jaw-droppingly pretty and it plays really well as well. It has nice touches to the power-ups as well, with the second button making you temporarily huge and invulnerable for a short amount of time. Also, the power-ups in the game are really meaty. Well, I say meaty, probably the better description is fishy, as all your weaponry in the game is a variety of sea creatures that you use to take out the enemies. Overall, this game is mad, it's fun, and it needs to be played by more. Just make sure that you play the unprotected bootleg version of the game on MAME, because that has the in-game music and sound. Right, there you go. That was my top 5 games for the letter H. Hope you enjoyed, and I can't wait to hear your own suggestions and thoughts of what games you would choose. So don't forget, I'm on the podcast RGDS, otherwise known as the Retro Gaming Discussion Show. It's a free podcast and it's just a group of mates chatting about all things retro, and I think it's a lot of fun. So in the meantime, look out for my next video covering the letter I, as it's going to be another belter. So until next time, keep it retro.